Well, hello. Good day. I am Roy Harriman with Ministry Pacific, and I'm delighted to have Travis Phipps of Enable Ministry Partners here with us today. Travis, thanks for joining us.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Our topic, as you know, is protecting your church and nonprofit from cyber criminals. Now, let's quickly identify some of the things that are at stake here. Just a few possibilities include that a hacker could electronically or even physically steal the private data of your members and sell it. Ransomware demands, which I know Travis will probably engage on that point later. Church funds can be electronically stolen. Payment fraud, someone posing as a pastor or missionary or friend of the church can illicitly request funds and get them if you're not on your guard. And then online churches and online church services or live streams can be disrupted by hecklers or ideological groups. That's not happening as much as it did in the early days of Zoom in the pandemic, but it's still a possibility. And so these are all big issues. But fortunately, we have a guest who is equal to the task, and that is Travis Phipps, Director of Technology at Enable Ministry Partners. And Travis, we're so glad you're here. And to start off, why don't you tell us a little bit about your background and tell us about Enable Ministry Partners, what makes it unique?
Yeah, absolutely. So Enable Ministry Partners started 21 years ago with the intent and purpose to serve churches. In fact, our whole mission as an organization is that we are focused on changing lives by serving those who serve. So we view it as our calling, as our mission as an organization to serve those that are on the front lines of ministry by helping specifically meet technology needs and bring knowledge and expertise to bear in the technology space. And so we're honored and blessed. We have 80 employees today serving across the United States, and we serve clients literally from Alaska all the way down to Florida and everywhere in between. And so we love having the opportunity to help further the mission of the church by focusing where our skill set and our gifting is on the technology side. For me personally, I love Enable. I love what I get to do. I tell everybody God built me to do this job. I grew up as a preacher's kid, so I grew up in church. I got to see all the backside of how a church works, but technology is what always clicked for me. And so being able to marry that skill set and that God-given talent and bring it together within a ministry space, I view as an honor and a privilege every single day.
Well, Travis, we're delighted you're here. As I can speak from personal experience in ministry, is we need help. And it's good, and you get us because not only of your upbringing, but the work that Enable does. Also want to welcome a few other people. Maribeth from Reno, Nevada, Steve from West Virginia. Good to connect with you as well. Raleigh, North Carolina, Pleasant Hill, California, several other people from LA and places around Southern California, as well as people who I haven't heard from. So we are delighted that you're here. Churches and nonprofits have a tendency to suffer from what I would call the "it can't happen here" syndrome. For the longest time, this kind of thinking prevailed in terms of church security, whereas the idea of some armed intruder doing harm to us was just not in the realm of possibility, or that only happened in big cities or wherever it's supposed to happen. Well, some terrible incidences of violence occurred that unfortunately have dispelled that notion, and people are now taking church security seriously everywhere because they understand it's not about an ideological threat. It's about, hey, that's my cousin in there and I'm mad at him, so I'm going in there. This has also continued to be the case, unfortunately, when it comes to financial fraud, whereas 1 in 3 churches have been victimized by someone from within stealing funds. Nonprofits lose billions of dollars a year, actually, yes, billions, through fraud. When it comes to cybersecurity and churches and the risks that are there, what are some of the key risks right now that are facing churches and nonprofits today, as this stuff is always evolving?
Yeah, so there are tons of risks and threats. The things that we see most often that are successful at attacking a church tend to revolve around access to information, whether that's an email account being compromised and the attacker literally has control and full access to that mailbox to literally impersonate the individual. That one we see very commonly. The other thing we see a lot of is the kind of the broad solicitation for, hey, this is your pastor and I'm in a prayer meeting right now, but I really need to buy some gift cards. If you'll just buy them and send me a picture of them, I promise I'll hit you back next week. That one is very common, and we're seeing that hit both church staff as well as church members, both through email and through texting these days. So it's like no avenue is safe at this point. And then you mentioned earlier ransomware. Unfortunately, we are very intimately familiar with several churches that have had active ransomware events, some smaller and some very large. And in the cases of the larger ones, literally the entire IT infrastructure was basically scrapped and they rebuilt it all from scratch. In some cases, they still had access to some data. In some cases, they had access to no data. And so that can be a really daunting thing to deal with. Those are probably the most common things. You mentioned earlier, though, and you're not wrong. In fact, just this past week, we had another church fall victim to this compromised email account where an attacker was able to gain access, and they literally lived inside the mailbox long enough to go study the person's speech patterns and the way they wrote messages. And the attacker began to engage with vendors pretending to be the user, and did so in a way that the user had no idea this was going on. And the end result was a six-figure wire transfer that, last I heard, has not been recovered. And unfortunately, the FBI has said, it kind of is a little too small for us to worry about. We have so many cases of this that it kind of has to hit a dollar threshold before we really can devote resources to it. And so that's a really, really bad spot to be in.
Well, I have to say that's deeply disturbing what you just shared. All of those instances. So Travis, in your experience, what is the awareness level like in terms of churches and nonprofits that, hey, these are threats, these are real, these are things that can happen to you if you're not prepared?
What I've seen, especially over the last year, is that more and more church leaders really are paying attention to what they hear in the news, and they recognize that this is happening more often, but they all tend to feel ill-equipped to really understand the threat or how they are exposed to the threat. You mentioned earlier, Roy, about that there used to be a belief that from a physical security standpoint that churches maybe weren't at a heavy risk. And these days we don't take that for granted. We all believe and churches are all investing heavily in physical security. But what I've been reminding folks of is these digital threats, those threat actors can attack you from literally anywhere in the world on any day at any time. So while the physical security is very important, and I don't want to diminish that, the threat actors there are limited to what's in your physical locale. Whereas the digital threats you're facing, they literally can be anywhere around the world. And so helping church leaders understand what the specific risk factors are or what they can do to reduce their risk is what I love talking about. It saddens me at times to have to talk about it, but I love helping to share that knowledge like we are today.
That's excellent. And great point that, anyone with internet access, if they wanted to, could try to cause mayhem for your organization. Travis has given me a cheat sheet of the things that he wants to emphasize today. So I know that the first thing is, you may think, oh, that's silly, but is passwords. Now, Travis, in my experience dealing with small businesses, churches, nonprofits, when you ask people about their passwords, they don't know what their password is. They've lost it. Someone has pointed out to me, it's really like the keys to your house, or the keys to your business or your vehicle. Would you just like throw those over your shoulder and walk away? No. So how can people take passwords seriously, and what are some best practices to have passwords that can really help enhance security?
Yeah, absolutely. We're going to go through several suggestions here, and that's really where I like to start, is to point out that the things we're going to suggest almost seem simple, because honestly, most of them are really simple. Where we really are at most risk is where we become complacent or lazy about the simple things. And so passwords is the number one thing. Like we start with passwords and there are several recommendations around them. Number one is treat them like underwear. Don't leave them out laying around so people can find them and see them, right? You want to keep them private and secure. You want to change them often. Now, I realize there are some people who will say, oh, you shouldn't change your password all the time. And we can get into that debate. I will just say this: church staff often share their passwords with volunteers and trusted family members. And as long as you're sharing a password with somebody, which, by the way, you shouldn't share your underwear, right? But you also then need to change it often if you're sharing it ever, right? So the other thing is length. Length is what matters more than anything else in a password. So I don't have the chart to share today, but you can find many representations of this online. The longer your password, the harder it is for it to be guessed or electronically broken and figured out. It used to be that we said a 6 or an 8 character password was long enough that'll secure you. These days, an 8 character password can be broken in a matter of hours by a sufficiently powerful computer. And so the recommendation these days is at least 12, if not 15 or more characters in your password. And then you're going, how am I supposed to remember a random sampling of 15 characters? Don't. We highly recommend using a passphrase. So think of your password like a sentence. And you literally, in most cases, can type a sentence, including spaces, into the password box for most applications. So make it easy for you to remember, but make it really hard for a computer to guess it by making it longer. The other thing is never use the same password in 2 different places. So it used to be that we would have our one password that we used for work and email and our bank and Facebook and all of those things. Well, the problem is all it takes is one of those places to be hacked, your password to be leaked. And now anybody smart's going to go, well, I'm going to use that password and I'm going to try all these other places they might have used it. So now you not only got compromised in the place that got compromised, but now you can be compromised in all these other places because you used the same password. So don't do that. Use a unique, distinct password for every system and every platform that you utilize. So longer is better. Passphrases are great, and use distinct, unique passwords.
Excellent. And the idea that passwords are like underwear, kind of gross, but honestly, it works. It helps us remember. It helps us remember something very practical. That's an excellent analogy. And you also brought out something that many people believe in. I know just enough to be dangerous, but that passwords are broken by an individual trying with keystrokes. And actually, as you inferred, it's a machine blasting, trying, and so it's not a person just trying to outguess you.
That's right. And computers are smarter and faster at thinking than any of us will ever be. And so their ability to iterate through variations of your password and apply machine algorithms to that process is amazing and astounding.
So let me ask you a related question about passwords. With churches and nonprofits, many times we'll have, say, an online service. Maybe it's a video service or where we have shared access, where numerous people are using the same platform. And so therefore you have a list of passwords, either that people have in common, or you just simply, you have a list of passwords, say it only applies to you. Where should you keep that list? Should it be a hard copy, buried several feet below ground? Should it be on your hard drive in an encrypted document? What's the best way to keep them safe? Because if someone wanders into your trove of usernames and passwords, you're in big trouble, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Our best recommendation is use a password manager application purpose-built to solve that problem. So I mentioned earlier, you should have a unique password for every system you use. Well, you're not going to remember all of those. So you're going to have to put them somewhere safe. Scribbling them down, writing them down, somewhat safe if it always stayed in your home. But the reality is these days we're mobile and we're out and about and we're using our mobile devices to access systems and things. So we need access to those passwords in a lot of places. And to your point, Roy, we need to share them with coworkers for some passwords, right? As much as possible, avoid shared accounts is our recommendation, but there are times where you just have to. Good password manager applications will allow you to delegate access to certain passwords, to keep them secure in a restricted way. And they encrypt them in a way that even the company who provides you the software can never get that data from you or on your behalf. So it does mean you will have one really good, strong password that's your master password that you never tell anybody and you never use for anything else. It will protect all of your other passwords within that tool. And I'll plug our website, enableministry.com. We have a blog article that gives some recommendations around great password manager options.
Excellent. And Christopher, he just reached out about that. What about password management software? And you would responsibly go to the blog of Enable Ministry Partners, and the information is there, or you can connect with Travis directly as well. So
yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. So Travis, the next thing is that strong passwords are important, but they're not enough. Talk to us about two-factor or multi-factor authentication and what that means.
Yeah, so at its most basic level, multi-factor authentication means that you are using multiple forms of identity to confirm you are who you say you are. In traditional IT realms, we've always used a username and a password as our unique identifiers. And we said, look, nobody else is going to know our password, therefore, this is how you can know it's us. Well, that's not good enough these days when our password can be leaked, compromised, hacked, whatever. And so we want to do something that can prove it's really me logging in. If somebody in, I don't know, in France had my username and my password, then they could go log into a system and pretend to be me. But if I also, when logging in, need to provide a code that you text to my phone, or a code that I look on my phone screen and it's changing every 30 seconds, then there's no way the person in France has my phone with them in order to get that code in the moment. So multi-factor authentication just means username, password, and some other way to confirm you are who you say you are. Most commonly, that's something like a text message or an app that's running on your phone. That also can be done literally with a phone call. There are other mechanisms. It can be about your eyes or your thumbprint or many other forms. But we highly recommend multi-factor authentication be used on every system that is remotely accessible. So if you can log into it from inside the church or outside the church, we recommend you put multi-factor authentication to protect that access and the data that's behind it.
Obviously, sounds like a no-brainer. This creates hurdles for bad guys, but it also creates hurdles for the people who are working with it. So for example, if I'm working on an account on behalf of another person, well, then an authentication is going to be sent to them, not to me. Maybe they're in a meeting, and so all progress is stalled. Is there a way around that, or is it just that's what's required to be secure?
There are mechanisms to do a shared multi-factor token experience, but I'll just be honest, don't. I recognize that it is more inconvenient, but the truth is being compromised, losing money, having a ransomware attack is much more inconvenient than each person having their own dedicated account and using it for the intended purpose. IT systems these days are being built with the idea that you are not sharing accounts. You get an account and I get an account, and we both can have access to the same things. But from a data security and compliance perspective, it's better for me to have my access and you to have yours. So if one of us does something nefarious or accidentally falls prey to something, it can be clear where that attack came from. When it's a shared account, there's no real accountability, and it's much harder to track down and trace. So all IT platforms are moving away from this idea of a shared account access. And so I'd rather not even share ways that you could get around that best practice.
That's good. And Kurt was commenting on here. He said, I haven't implemented multi-factor authentication yet because of the staff learning curve, or he said it can be inconvenient.
Yeah.
But as you pointed out, I have noticed this too. More and more applications allow you to add team members. So in other words, you have your own login, but there's one subscription. I know MailChimp, for example, is that way. You can add a team member to MailChimp. Also, if you have a Google My Business account for your church or your nonprofit, you can add team members to that. So then each team member has access, and you don't have to, the authentication doesn't have to go over to Charlie, who's in a 4-hour meeting. So yeah, no, that's excellent.
That's right. And to Kurt's point here about MFA kind of being inconvenient, yeah, but guess what? There is no way to become more secure and stay or become more convenient. Becoming more secure is going to require some inconvenience. It just is. And that is a constant wrestling that has to take place. But frankly, it's no different than any other business decision. And I know that can be risky to say in a church, but you're always making business decisions, and you're balancing risk versus reward. That's what leaders do all day, every day. And this is just another of them. What I will say around the staff learning curve and the inconvenience, I would highly doubt your staff aren't already using it. If they do online banking, they are already using MFA. There is no bank in the world that doesn't require MFA these days. And more of the websites and the tools that they're using in their personal life are enforcing MFA on them. What we're seeing with church staff is we really don't get pushback these days when we suggest it. Not everybody's excited about it, but they know what it is and they know how it works, which makes it a lot easier to explain, look, here's what we're trying to protect from our organization. And as a result, we all have to be in this together. And yes, it will add a little inconvenience, but we're doing it to increase our security.
Not embellishing here, want to offer just praise for everyone who's joining us today, because for most people in ministry or nonprofit work, this is this type of thing. IT security is an acquired taste. I have yet to meet someone who was going to seminary because they said, "Oh, I'm so excited to organize things." Right? There's always this passion and vision, but someone's got to come behind and pick up the pieces, right? So that's what administration is about. You're doing it by being a part of this today. Travis, and again, thank you for the comments. We'll come back to those as we have time, and please continue to share. Travis, another point that you have made is updates, the importance of accepting software updates. Now, what you pointed out to me that I wasn't fully aware of was that a significant reason for many of the updates is that they are released by software vendors because bad guys have found vulnerabilities. So the software vendor plays a catch up to patch the vulnerability, and that's what software updates are for. So the question is, do we always accept the update? One of my sons is in software development, and so he'll say, no, don't let Windows do that. So do we always accept the updates? Do we really need to use any judgment here? I appreciate your thoughts. I know it's a complicated question.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So first off, what I want to say is one of the key critical things is get the updates and do apply them. I'll use Apple as an example. So Apple comes out with a new operating system for their phones every year, right? Like clockwork. And so last year they came out with iOS version 15. And when they released it, it had a bunch of new features. So the reason for iOS 15 was to add new functionality and new features. Since that time, over the course of the last year, they have released 7 updates to iOS 15. They just this week released iOS 15.7. Every one of those point releases was to fix bugs, to fix security holes, to fix vulnerabilities that existed in the software. So a lot of times people assume that the updates are just about adding new features all the time, but they're not. They do that, but also they are patching bugs and vulnerabilities that have been found out, and in many cases are being actively exploited. In the case of iOS 15.7, it is an actively exploited vulnerability that they are patching. And so one of the things, and I know Roy will appreciate this from an insurance angle, insurance companies will tell you, do the easy things to protect yourself. If you're not doing updates, your insurance premiums will be higher. They're going to ask you the question. And if you're not doing it on a regular basis with a regular cadence, you will pay more for your insurance, because this is a simple thing to do to stay on top of to further protect yourself. To the question of, well, should we always just install whatever comes out? That is risky. Now, I will tell you, it used to be that I would say, yeah, maybe give it a month before you install that thing, because the software vendors make mistakes too. Give them a little bit of time to sort that out. These days, the quality of the updates from most major vendors has gotten much better. They are much better about not putting out bad updates. It doesn't mean it doesn't happen. But I will tell you, as an organization, our standard is we delay only by 1 week and 1 week only. So when Microsoft or Apple starts to release things, we delay by a week to give them a little bit of time and the rest of the world a little bit of time to find the problems. But we don't wait more than a week. And we start getting those updates applied, and we make sure that by the second week, by the end of the second week, all of the machines that we're managing have received those updates. That's how important and critical we believe that they are.
At the risk of sounding self-serving here, and Travis didn't ask me to say this, but he points out that we need people, right? We need experts with accounting, with dealing with the IRS, right? We don't think, oh,
right.
yeah, I could give me that IRS code manual. I'll sift through that and figure this out, right? We need experts to help us to make the best decisions. So for many of us, when we hear backup, depending on our background, we think maybe about a little physical hard drive that's on our desk that sometimes we remember to use, or maybe it's a USB drive that we carry around in our pocket. But Travis, when you talk about backup, you may mean that, but you mean much more. And you counsel clients not only to back up data, but depending on the size of the organization, to have a network and a backup system set up so that if their system is compromised, say it's ransomware or a virus or the building burns down, you can continue working with the data that you've accumulated over the years. Tell us a little bit about what a backup system could look like for churches and nonprofits.
Sure. I will tell you, this is one topic that I could do a whole hour on. So I will try to be very succinct, and I'm happy to go deeper if anybody wants to reach out. When we talk about backup at N-able, we talk really about two different kind of approaches or options that you have. There's the option of a disaster recovery approach. In other words, we're going to back up the data, and we're going to have the ability to recover from a disaster if and when it happens. Now, that recovery might look like a day or two, or it might look like a few days to weeks to even a month or more, depending on exactly what happened and exactly what the impact was. We're protecting the data generally by putting it in some kind of cloud storage system. So it's separated from our production day-to-day use. It's separated from our building. So if a fire, a tornado, something like that happens, the backup of the data is unimpacted. But we want to have the ability to recover. So that's a disaster recovery. On the other hand, Roy was alluding to, for some of our larger organizations or organizations that do more with on-site systems and data, we offer a business continuity solution. The idea behind business continuity is that you can continue to operate and access your data in the midst of your disaster. So in the case of a tornado, kind of an extreme case, if a tornado were to hit your building and take out part of your building, including your server infrastructure, if you only have backups in the cloud, you've got to wait until you have more servers to restore that data to in order to access it and use it. So that's going to take some time. In the case of a business continuity solution, we would give you the ability to immediately start accessing and using your data, maybe by accessing it in a cloud resource, maybe by running your server infrastructure from an offsite data center and giving you remote access to it. We've had clients affected in certain situations where they managed their payroll from an on-site system, and it was critically important that they have the ability to keep doing that in the midst of a server failure. And that's not a hypothetical. I have a real-world example of that taking place. So, of course, like with anything, the more protection and the more capability you want, the more cost is involved. But again, that's an evaluation of your risk level and what is the impact if what you're backing up were gone for a day, a week, or a month. If it's low, then a disaster recovery solution may be perfectly suited for you. If the impact is high, you may need more of a business continuity solution to keep you operational in the midst of dealing with whatever your disaster is.
Yeah, these are important conversations to have. And unfortunately, you have to have them before the disaster happens.
That's right.
Or
That's right.
They're no good. So they're good conversations. However, you're governed, whether by a staff team, board team, a combination of those. What would we do if we lost access to, and you fill in the blank, whether it's a database, or a network. Travis is the kind of person that you want to be able to have a relationship with and talk to about that.
But please, let's talk before the disaster. Absolutely.
Yes,
We can
yes.
help you in the midst, but I would much rather help you prepare ahead of time.
Now, unfortunately, cyber liability coverage can't stop you from being hacked or compromised. That happens on Travis's end and on actions you take on your end. But there are cases where you've done everything possible and you still experience some kind of cyber disruption from an outside player. And that's what liability insurance is for. So what does it do would be your question. Okay, it covers the cost of responding to, investigating, and cleaning up damage caused by a hack or a data breach. How expensive is that? Well, the answer is always it depends, but research has shown it costs an organization about $250 for every compromised record. So cyber liability coverage provides resources, including experts to investigate the breach and assist you with regulatory compliance. So for example, someone's personal bank account information is now out on the internet. What is your liability? What do you have to do? Part of that is notifying members and donors about the breach. And just think about that. That in and of itself would be quite a Herculean task. What kind of language do you put in the notification in terms of legal language? And also funds for business interruption expenses. Travis just talked about how do you continue to meet payroll if your whole system's down or compromised. And then finally, if you were sued for failure to provide cybersecurity, this covers funds for attorney's fees, settlements, and judgments. Now, a caveat is that cyber liability coverage does, just like all types of insurance, it requires you to do something. It's not like, and no one would do this, but just for clarity, you couldn't say, well, I'm going to do nothing and I'm just going to take out cyber liability coverage. No, you have to demonstrate that essentially you're a solid insurable customer. This is someone who is trying to protect their data, and this is a fail-safe when bad things happen to good people who try hard. So if you have questions about that, you want to get a quote, you want to learn more about it, at Ministry Pacific, we would love to hear from you. And I want to shift back to Travis now. And point number 5 is user management, or who's got the cyber keys. And you address this to some degree with passwords, but I've seen churches when it comes to physical security, whereas they just give out keys just fairly nonsensically to all kinds of volunteers. And then all of a sudden, hey, things are missing. People are accessing the building at all kinds of day and night. So then they have to go back and re-key all the doors, and people get upset because they can't get in anymore. And why aren't they allowed? You see essentially a similar thing happening with cyber or network access. What can and should organizations do?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the key elements that we see often is this shared user account that we talked about earlier. We have 6 volunteers that all kind of do the same thing, so we're just going to let them use one account. Well, the risk there is what happens when number 6 moves on to another congregation, or number 5, gets sick or has his personal computer compromised that had access to the shared account. So the first thing is no shared accounts. If I haven't made that clear, don't use shared accounts. Make sure that you're assigning discrete and unique access and accounts to each person that's going to access your systems and your data. That's one. The other reason that matters is the most common mistake that we see churches make is they fail to remove people's access when they no longer should have access. Whether their role in the organization changes or they move on to work or attend somewhere else, and their account just gets left. It's like it's just abandoned. Well, the big risk there is you just left another door to your digital building open, right? Now that person is not maintaining or keeping up with the security of their account any longer. They may reuse that password, or they may have used the same password in 12 other websites. And the minute it gets compromised, now their account becomes compromised in your system, and they haven't been around for 2 years. And yet their account was still the thing that got used to access your environment. That's a very, very bad thing to have happen. We see it time and time and time again. If you want to see this, what this looks like on a really large scale, go read up on how the Colonial Pipeline was hacked. There were multiple layers to it, but one of the key elements, the account that was used to compromise the Colonial Pipeline network was for an employee that was no longer with the organization. Had they just deleted or terminated the account when the guy left, they would have been protected and secured. So it sounds simple, but it's a process thing. And like I said before, we stumble on the small details because we get complacent about it. So we've got to be intentional about some of these small process and policy things to make sure that we clean up after ourselves to not leave doors wide open.
If you think about it in terms of the facility, you got to know who has keys. And
Right.
When someone leaves, they give you your key, right? Or should. And
Should.
similar, exactly similar. And what I think is fascinating about many of the things that you brought up today, Travis, is I haven't yet heard you say, yeah, you've got to learn how to write certain lines of code. Now, what you're talking about, you're not talking about essentially technical matters, though consultation is required for technical matters, but you're talking about management and education and as the key to really protecting your organization.
Absolutely.
Number 6 is a secure Wi-Fi network and internal network. And this is something, Travis, that no one would object to. Who would say, oh, well, I don't care if my network is secure, but there are so many networks that are not secure. What do you recommend?
Yeah, so this kind of can encompass a whole lot of things, but at its most basic level, you want to think about the if you're providing Wi-Fi in your environment, who has access to what parts of your network? So again, thinking about like it as if it were physical keys to the building, would you typically provide a key to every guest that walks in your building and say, here, feel free to walk in the finance office and explore through the file cabinet? Well, no, you wouldn't do that. But if you're providing a guest Wi-Fi network that doesn't have restrictions or limitations, maybe that guest network is the same that your staff uses, is the same where your server with all of your digital files sits. You have to think about, well, then I've just basically handed them the key to go walk up to the file cabinet. Now, I hope I remembered to lock the file cabinet, right? Hopefully the server is secure. Hopefully we've put all those patches on it. But if we didn't, or if there's an unknown vulnerability, then we've just handed somebody the ability to walk right up and start beating on it and trying to break into it. So we want to segment our staff wireless users from our guest wireless users at its most basic. So we don't want to be sharing the Wi-Fi password that staff use with other people. They don't have any business using that same wireless network. That's one element. The other thing, especially for larger organizations, is to think about your building automation systems, your security camera systems, your electronic door access control systems. All of those things now run on your data network or your IT network. And each one of those things has its own vulnerabilities, its own misconfigurations that take place, the things that make it vulnerable to being a launch point for other attacks in your network. So we are big proponents of segmenting your network, ideally and primarily by using VLANs. And I realize now I went technical. This is where you get help, right? But make sure your network is being segmented so not everything can just immediately talk to each other. The Internet of Things means that almost everything you buy these days can attach to your Wi-Fi. But the minute it attaches to your Wi-Fi, it becomes a potential entry point or a foothold where an attacker can launch from that device to other things in your network. And so you want to restrict and limit the ability for things on your network to talk to each other. And the best way to do that is to segment and essentially have firewalls that exist between each of those types of devices in the environment.
It doesn't sound like you're saying that you oppose a public Wi-Fi network, but it should be separate and there should be a wall between it and any kind of business network.
Bingo. I'm hugely in favor of a guest or public Wi-Fi network, but make sure that it is implemented securely. in a secure way. And for the techie people on the call, I know I've seen a few friends. I will say this: client isolation on your guest network. Use client isolation. That provides like a miniature firewall around each individual device on your guest network to even further protect your users of the network as well as the network itself.
As an example of what you're talking about, a friend of mine worked on the administrative side of a major school district, thousands of students, very well funded, near where I live. And they were subject to a ransomware attack. And the origin of it was traced back to wireless printer connections. So again, all of these things can yield vulnerabilities, and that's why we need experts. And unless we're living in somehow a completely analog world, we need experts. So.
I saw my friend Mark posted in the chat a minute ago. He said, don't forget about the BIOS and the firmware updates on computer and other hardware like printers, because those also have security bugs that are being patched by their vendors. So just like you mentioned, this wireless printer was the foothold that the rest of the attack was launched from. So unfortunately, yeah, you got to work on updating those things too.
Well, Travis, you have stated that the greatest vulnerability is, we need some kind of a drum roll or something, but I don't have anyone, unfortunately, is people. And that is the church and nonprofit staff and volunteers. And basically, we could summarize this with the saying is, we don't know what we don't know. And the solution, therefore, is training. What kind of training, yours included, is available for lay people who are not techies, and how often do they need it?
Yeah, so this one is near and dear to my heart, because you're right, Roy. At the end of the day, the responsibility to secure the environment really relies way more on the people and how they interact with and use the technology than really even just the technology itself. Like the IT people can secure the technology, but we've got to figure out how to get all of the users of the technology to operate in a secure way, which has been a focus of a lot of our conversation around passwords and multi-factor authentication and all of those pieces. There are training seminars and training curriculums that are available, some freely over the internet. There are many paid platforms that you can utilize that can provide training resources or ongoing training videos and content that you can send to your staff. I will tell you that our experience is with church and ministry-minded individuals. They understand that their role and their purpose in their organization, for most of them, is not a business role or an administrative role. They think and they speak and they operate on a daily basis in ministry terms. It's about relationship, and it's about communication, and it's about sharing the gospel. Well, when you start talking to people about cybersecurity and you start mentioning all this business jargon, like business email compromise and other things like that, ministry staff kind of shut down because they don't have a context to understand what any of that means, especially if they've worked in the church primarily or exclusively for very long. They don't have experience and exposure to a lot of this business jargon that gets used in a lot of the trainings. I'm not saying that the trainings are bad, and I'm not saying you shouldn't use them. I know churches using them very successfully. What I have seen be the most effective way to educate staff and to get them in the mindset of thinking about their responsibility around cybersecurity, the best way is things like this webinar or live taught training seminars at your church or at groups that focus on serving churches. Like I'll throw out the church network, the church IT network. There's other organizations that serve churches and provide this content in a church focused and church jargon, if you will, approach. At the end of the day, it's about doing it and doing it somewhat consistently. You've got to be talking about it. You've got to be educating your staff. You've got to help them know what their responsibility is. And you do have to help them decipher and understand what all this jargon means. So believe it or not, church people are used to sitting there listening to somebody talk for a little while. It's almost like they do it on a weekly basis, right? And so they know what it means to sit and listen and to learn. And so a live taught seminar or webinar, we have some freely available on our website. Again, I will plug enableministry.com. feel free to go steal any content we put out there. The whole reason we put it out there was so that churches would use it and better protect their organization. As far as how often, at a minimum, you need to be doing something once a year, at an absolute bare minimum. Even if that's just you send an email with some tips and tricks or some reminders, that I would argue could happen much more often than once a year. But this kind of bring everybody in a room, let's talk about it for 30 minutes. Let's share some slides from some experts, at least once a year.
Bring in lunch, make the most of the time. If your organization is too small to host something on your own, join with a church association or a nonprofit association or local people. Take advantage of opportunities through Enable Ministry Partners and others that are already there, or set up a consultation. Maybe it's going to be an online training, but it doesn't have to be this arduous type of training, particularly if you partner with Travis or someone like Travis who understands really the heart of ministry and charitable service. It doesn't have to be a nails on a chalkboard, type training. So good trainers can make all the difference. So, and all of these things that we've talked about, they do require some sacrifice. They do require some inconvenience. But as Travis pointed out, the cost of losing revenue, losing trust, losing credibility because we didn't take basic management practices into account are much greater than any inconvenience that we can suffer. And also, we can know that we're doing the best we can. We don't have to worry about, oh, what if that happens to us? So let's take just a couple of questions. There's a lot of excellent ones that have been answered here, that have been asked here. Travis, so Debbie asks, we're a small congregation, and the issues we encounter are people finding our phone numbers and posing as the pastor and asking for gift cards. One, how do they get our phone numbers? That's our first question. Let's start with that.
Yeah, so it's funny you asked this, because I was just in a conversation with some other church IT leaders just this week about this problem. There seems to be an uptick in this exact thing happening right now across the US. We've seen it. I saw it at my own church. I've seen it across other clients, and then I've seen it from other churches that I'm connected with through this church IT community. We all have our guesses. At the end of the day, we're all pretty convinced that it's primarily social media, actually. So people on the whole are pretty free and open with the information that they share through social media platforms. And we've all gotten a little lax in protecting our own private personal information. And maybe we don't even think about our phone number as private and personal information, but all it takes is for it to get to one, and now it's available everywhere. So we've been able to trace some of these back to actual posts on LinkedIn or other social media platforms where a congregant and a pastor were engaging in a conversation or a dialogue. And so that's allowed the attacker to create a relationship saying, oh, I get it. This person has some authority. They know this person. Haha. Now all I need is this person's phone number. I don't even need the person in authority's real phone number. I'll just pretend to be them. All I need was the target's phone number. So we're pretty confident that a lot of this is because of social media. I will admit, some of us have questioned and asked, okay, is there a correlation here? Are we all using some same software or some same database system or some same financial package? So far, we've not been able to find a correlation. So we don't have any smoking gun. I'm not trying to cast aspersions toward anybody, because we don't have anything that says any particular platform or system was to blame. But we think it's just that the attackers are getting really good at taking all this disparate information and piecing together relationships, because we're putting it all out there for everybody to read and see.
Fascinating. And yes, the gift card scam, I see news reports about it all the time. And churches call and say, hey, it's not us, and call the local television station. So yes, we have to be alert. Debbie also asks if you have any thoughts about churches using third-party payment systems such as Venmo. She doesn't say this, but PayPal would be another one.
Yeah. So this is one where we get into an accounting question, and I'm going to try to be very careful and mention I am not a lawyer and I am not an accountant. I am a technology guy. What I will say is my cursory understanding is that most of those systems are designed more for personal one-on-one transactions and not really designed for business use. And even though sometimes as churches we like to say, well, we're not a business, we are an organization, we are a company. So I would highly recommend you make sure and pay very specific attention to the terms and conditions of the tools you're using. There are plenty of great church and nonprofit focused donation platforms or online giving systems that focus on this space and are designed to accept donation transactions. I would recommend working with one that is built to do what you're needing to do and understands your culture and what you're after, more so than some of these third-party kind of consumer to consumer type systems.
Excellent. Well, Debbie, thank you for sharing a question, and we're sorry to hear that. That's extreme. It'll be frustrating to have to battle to fight that battle. Ronnie has a more technical question, and he says our tech services team is to use the tech Wi-Fi network. How often should we change the password to the Wi-Fi network? So we've talked about personal computer passwords, but what about network passwords?
Yeah, so full disclosure, Ronnie is a friend and a client of N-able. I have known Ronnie for many, many years. So I feel like he's trying to get free advice, even though he could just, ask me in a ticket. But love you, Ronnie, and appreciate the question. What I'll say is it depends. Typically for that tech or production or media wireless network, that network space, we like to set that up and allow the media or production team to kind of self-manage what equipment is there, how they're using that equipment, because they're the experts in their gear and we can help them with the IP addresses and the basic networking. So typically we don't necessarily push on them a need or a requirement or a timeline for that change. But what we do recommend is that they think about what's their turnover like and what's the risk of somebody having a password that gets access and gains access to all of their equipment. If they feel the risk is high or they have good turnover, I would rotate that password more often, maybe every 3 months or every 6 months. If they feel like their turnover is low and the worst somebody could do is see, what level the amp was at today, maybe that's a low risk and you only change it once a year or so. But those are some guidelines that we typically recommend.
I'll just share a comment from Kurt as we're closing out here. He says, attackers are good at targeting churches. Less than 3 days after updating our website with our new pastor, we were getting targeted attacks using our new pastor's name. Wow. So
Yep.
we have to be on the alert. And let's face it, churches and nonprofits, in terms of the financial and technology food chain, we are lower. We don't have all of the bulletproof firewalls, security measures, and the latest and greatest. So in many ways, we are easy targets, but we don't have to be, as we've learned here today, with some education and awareness. So, well, our hope. We want to thank everyone for joining us. I want to thank Travis, especially for joining us here, and thank you for all of our guests. A lot of great questions. Our hope is that this is not the end of the conversation about cybersecurity and cybersecurity insurance, but just the beginning of the conversation. So we have shared contact information throughout this. So if you benefited from it, please share it with others. And we want to thank you again. Please reach out to N-able, to Travis, or to Ministry Pacific to learn more. So please continue this conversation offline. And we thank you all very much for joining us today. And thank you, Travis.